In the early Republic, Rome did not keep a standing army ready at all times. When danger rose, the state called up its citizens, men who spent most of the year as farmers and tradesmen. They gathered for a campaign season, marched out, and expected to go home again. That system produced numbers fast, but it also produced a problem. These soldiers fought for Rome, yet they did not always feel like soldiers. Training stayed uneven, and discipline depended on habits that had not fully formed. Orders could feel negotiable, especially when exhaustion, hunger, or fear set in. Units hesitated, lines loosened. Some men drifted backward when they should have held. Commanders saw how quickly a single moment of doubt could spread across a formation, turning caution into panic. The danger was not just the enemy's weapons. It was the idea that fear carried no cost. Roman leaders needed obedience that lasted longer than a speech before battle. They needed a force that stayed in place when every instinct pushed it to run. But with citizen militias, authority stayed fragile because the men in ranks remained members of the same community they returned to after the campaign. A commander could not rely on loyalty alone. He had to create consequences, and he began to search for a harsher kind of control. Rome did not fight one war at a time. Campaigns stacked up, armies stayed in the field longer, and the stakes rose fast. Under that pressure, the old expectation of willing obedience started to crack. Some units hesitated when commanders pushed them forward. Others pulled back too soon or refused orders they thought meant death. Each failure spread. Fear moved through the ranks like a message. For Roman leaders, that kind of weakness threatened more than a single battle. It threatened control. An army that questioned commands could collapse before it even met the enemy, and one act of defiance could invite another. So discipline stopped being informal and personal. It became something written into practice, something commanders could point to and apply. Punishment turned into policy, and the point was speed. The punishments also grew harsher on purpose. Leaders aimed them at entire groups, not just one offender, because a unit fought as a unit and failed as a unit. They needed consequences that soldiers could not ignore and could not bargain with. The message stayed simple. Obedience kept you alive. Disobedience endangered everyone. Fear was no longer an accident of war. It became a tool of command. Then the punishment gained a fixed shape, and it started to appear in the record as something more than a threat. The unit got broken down into small groups of 10. No arguments, no individual hearings. The men waited while lots got prepared because the outcome had to look like fate, not a commander's mood. In that moment, discipline stopped being an idea. It became a procedure. One soldier in each 10 got picked by chance, not because he had been proven the worst, but because the lot landed on him. The rest did not simply watch. They carried out the execution themselves. 9 men killed the 10th. That detail mattered. It forced obedience to pass through the hands of ordinary soldiers, not just officers. The unit learned the lesson by doing it. So, decimation turned punishment into a ritual that everyone understood and nobody could safely resist. It mixed fear with participation, and it spread responsibility across the group. Afterward, the survivors remained together, but the bond changed. Each man had seen how quickly the army could turn inward and how easily chance could decide who lived. Order did not just get enforced. It got staged. Commanders used decimation when a whole unit failed, when a line broke, an order went ignored, or a retreat spread into panic. The point was not to find the single worst man. It was to declare that the group had fallen together. From that moment, discipline stopped being personal. It became collective. No one could claim he did his part and still feel safe. The selection by lot changed everything. A soldier could have fought hard and still ended up marked for death. Another could have frozen and survived. Chance replaced careful judgment, and that was the message. The unit learned that survival depended on the unit's behavior as a whole, not on private excuses. Fear no longer followed guilt. Fear followed membership. Decimation also forced the survivors to carry out the punishment themselves, and that made the lessons stick. The 9 had to become the instrument of the commander's will, even if they believed the chosen man had done nothing wrong. Afterward, the unit stayed intact, but changed. Trust shifted upward toward orders and sideways toward watching comrades. Collective failure now had a random price. Decimation did not stay tied to a single moment of panic in battle. Commanders reached for it when a unit turned on itself, when orders got ignored, lines broke down, and arguments became open refusal. Mutiny threatened more than one campaign. It threatened the idea that anyone was in charge at all, so the punishment shifted. It targeted not just fear under attack, but defiance inside the camp. Disorder spread in simple ways. Soldiers delayed marches, refused duties, or pushed back as a group when commanders demanded more. In a mass army, that kind of resistance multiplied fast. One company watched another and learned what it could get away with. Decimation answered that chain reaction with a brutal message. Collective disobedience carried collective risk. The unit paid, even if only some men led the trouble. And that changed what the punishment meant. It no longer waited for a collapse to happen first. It became a warning aimed at the future, a way to scare a formation back into obedience before rebellion hardened. The threat alone did work because everyone understood the logic. Any group could be marked as contaminated by disorder. Any group could be cut down by chance. Discipline became preventative terror. Once decimation existed as an accepted tool, it did not stay a simple response to failure. It became a message. In armies that followed one man for years, a commander's biggest enemy often sat inside his own camp: doubt, hesitation, divided loyalty. So some generals reached for the harshest option, not because a unit collapsed, but because they wanted everyone to remember who controlled life and death. The logic was cold and practical. A general who looked merciful could be tested again. A general who proved willing to destroy his own soldiers could not be safely challenged. Decimation delivered that proof in public, quickly, and with a built-in lesson. No one in the ranks could count on personal virtue to save them. Discipline stopped being only about the army's rules. It started depending on the commander's will. That shift changed the meaning of punishment. Decimation no longer only corrected behavior, it advertised authority. It warned other units before they even moved. It also warned the political world outside the camp, where reputation mattered as much as victories. An ambitious general who could terrify his own men could present himself as untouchable. Terror became a form of power, and discipline became one more way to build it. In the late Republic, Rome's armies stopped fighting only foreigners. They fought each other. When politics turned into civil war, the same legions that once marched under one flag faced Roman opponents with Roman training. In that setting, decimation did not disappear. It reappeared with a sharper edge. A commander no longer punished failure against an enemy outsider. He punished Romans for endangering his cause. Civil war scrambled old ideas of loyalty. A unit could hesitate, argue, or drift toward another leader, and that hesitation became a threat bigger than any battlefield loss. Decimation answered that threat fast. 1 in 10 died, chosen by chance, killed by their own comrades, and the rest lived with the message. The point was not fairness. It was control. Obedience had to become safer than doubt. That shift changed how the punishment felt inside the ranks. Against foreign enemies, commanders framed it as discipline restoring order. In civil war, it looked like domination, a ruler testing whether men could be forced to kill their own to prove allegiance. The ritual still claimed to correct a unit, but it also broke it and remade it. Decimation became a warning written in Roman blood. Disloyalty had a price. In the early empire, the army stopped being a seasonal crowd of citizens and became a standing profession. Men signed up for long service, trained the same way, and lived under rules that stayed in place year after year. That change mattered. Discipline no longer depended on shocking the whole unit back into obedience. Command could be steady, daily, and predictable. Fear still existed, but it did not need to arrive in one brutal public sweep. The chain of command tightened. Orders flowed through permanent officers, routine inspections, and established punishments that could be scaled to the offence. A commander no longer had to gamble everything on a single act of terror to prove control. When a unit failed, the response could be narrower: remove ringleaders, demote leaders, cut pay, assign hard labour, or break up troublemakers. The system gave many levers, and decimation stopped being the default hammer. So decimation shifted into something different, a threat that hung in the background more than a policy used in practice. Its memory did work even when its blades stayed sheathed. The idea alone reminded soldiers that the group could be punished for the group's collapse. And that was the point now. A professional army ran best when discipline looked certain, not random, and when obedience came from structure more than spectacle. As decimation grew rarer in real camps, it grew louder on the page. Later, Roman writers treated it less as a tool a commander reached for, and more as a warning about what happened when order slipped. They picked out the most brutal examples and held them up like proof. In their telling, Rome stayed strong when men obeyed, and Rome weakened when discipline softened. The punishment became a lesson. After Rome's power fractured, post-Roman authors carried the story even further. They wrote for audiences who no longer lived under Roman command, but who still feared chaos and admired control. Decimation turned into a symbol of a lost system that once forced people into line. The point was no longer what exactly happened in a unit on a day of crisis. The point was what Rome supposedly represented. That shift changed the meaning of the practice. Decimation stopped being remembered as a specific procedure used in extreme moments with all its mess and politics. It became a clean myth about discipline, the kind of story used to praise harsh leaders and shame weak ones. Order was framed as something you purchased with terror, and collapse as what followed mercy. Rome's violence became Rome's brand. In the modern world, decimation rarely meant what it once meant. The word lived on, but it slid into metaphor. It described a town hit by war, a team ruined by scandal, a population cut down by disease. It suggested huge loss, not a counted procedure, and that shift mattered. The old act depended on being exact, public, and controlled. The new word became a warning sign for devastation. When people reached for decimation now, they often reached for something else too, the image of power enforcing obedience through fear. Modern armies and modern states usually condemned that idea, at least in law. Collective punishment sounded like the opposite of justice. Random selection sounded like the opposite of responsibility. The principle behind decimation, punishing many for the failure of a few, clashed with norms that demanded individual guilt and legal process. That contrast exposed how normal the unthinkable once felt. In the early Republic, killing comrades could be treated as a practical tool, not a moral crisis, because the goal stayed simple: keep the line from breaking and the army from dissolving. Survival of the unit outweighed the rights of the soldier. Today, that logic read as authoritarian control, not discipline. Decimation ended up remembered less as a method and more as a verdict on power.